Commissioner Becky Schaefer. Here. Commissioner Parrish.
Here.
Commissioner Stoker.
Here.
Commissioner Lemke.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer.
Here.
Commissioner Baca.
Here.
Alderman Stralchuk.
Here.
Mayor Abendroth.
Here. We have a quorum, and I'd like to introduce James Baca. He's a new member of our commission. First meeting. Thank you, James, for volunteering. Our first item is approval of the minutes from April 9th. Looking for a motion.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Then we have our consent agenda. First item on the consent agenda is a public hearing for Brain and Carly Borchert. The applicant is seeking conditional use grant approval for a guest house for the property located at 8110 West Bonnewell Road.
Motion to go into public hearing. Second.
Motion and a second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to the commission on this item? I don't see any.
Move to close public hearing?
Second.
Motion and a second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Next item is Ranch Court LLC. The applicant is seeking landscape plan approval for the approved single-family residential development located at 2100 West Ranch Court. The next item is Edge Consulting Engineers for Ozaukee County. The applicant is seeking building and site plan amendment to allow for construction of a 160-foot tall communications tower to replace an existing 152-foot communications tower for the property at 6333 West Bonnewell Road. That's in Mequon Park, and that is the county's communication tower. And that's our consent agenda. So,
Move approval of the consent agenda?
Second.
motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion of any of these items? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Moving on to regular business, the first item is Sean Keeson for Capco Park. The applicant is seeking site plan amendment approval to allow for extended hours for the baseball park located on the Concordia University campus. Just a reminder that any approval for changes on the Concordia campus must be approved by the Common Council. So our job here tonight is to recommend to the Common Council. The final decision will be made at the June 12th, I believe it is, Common Council meeting. We have two people, or no, we have one person who is registered to speak on this item. So let me call on Chuck Reynolds, who is opposed and wishes to speak. Chuck.
Thank you. Chuck Reynolds. I live just north of Concordia College, just through the woods, and I've lived there since 1984. And I can tell you that the sitting on the deck, the quiet nights sitting on the deck and opening the windows during the summer in a baseball game has changed completely. On June 8th, 2010, the Common Council, the neighbors around Concordia left disappointed with what occurred. But we were reconciled perhaps a little because there were certain conditions that were placed on the use of the baseball facility. There were 7 of them. I think Jack's going to put them up on the screen here. There are 2 I want to just bring up. One was the number 7, which said that the staff shall check light and sound levels at least once a year for compliance with the Planning Commission approval. So in the packet for this agenda item, the test results were provided for 3 years. And my first reaction was, why only 3 years of test results? Where's the formal test result document? Where's the formal report? Why wasn't the neighborhood south of Concordia tested more than once? And why wasn't the testing done further south based on prior complaints from the residences? And why didn't the results include anything regarding crowd size or wind direction? I did request formal copies of the test results for all of the years of operation, and I received prompt replies from Jack, from Kim, and from the mayor, and I appreciate that. But the responses I got only added to my confusion. So here are some of the highlights I got. One said, after 2014, the results were no longer documented if they were deemed in compliance. Another answer was the answer I got about noise levels was they check them at least once a year. And if they are within the 65 dPA restriction, they don't do anything, so there is no record. And the third one said, after 3 years of documenting the sound and light levels with no violations found, the department did not create a formal report. There are numerous developments in the city that require some level of monitoring, and staff randomly checks for compliance as part of our regular enforcement practices. The city has not received any complaints regarding the operations of the baseball stadium since 2014, which I understand isn't technically accurate. So anyway, the lack of the complaints aligned with the conclusions made during staff's ongoing random site visits. So those comments just actually left me more confused. And I'm not quite sure what to think. Were the tests done each year, and were they not reported? If the tests were not done, then who decides to arbitrarily stop following a condition of use? Does the city have the capabilities and the expertise to properly handle testing of this nature? Or is the staff overwhelmed with compliance and enforcement tasks throughout the rest of the city? I'm opposed to any change in the conditions of use of extending hours, since it doesn't appear to be any appetite for adhering to the existing conditions. And I think before we start discussing changing the conditions, we should figure out how we're going to enforce the current ones. The steps could include define what checking sound levels means. It's more than the PA system. Crowd size and wind speed and direction affects noise spillage into the neighborhood. Let's define what should be measured, when it should be measured, and where it should be measured, and so forth. And two, consider hiring a third party that has expertise in this area, one that the city, Concordia, or Capco Park and the representatives from the neighborhood can jointly agree on and set parameters for and the execution and reporting of the sound and light testing. The second condition I just want to point out, this was in June 8th, 2010, and it stated that a no right-hand turn sign onto Lakeshore Drive should be installed. The good news is that it was installed. The bad news is that this no right turn sign stipulated in the original site plan is not monitored. It's not enforced by the university or the bowl team. The sign is often ignored, and the lots feed considerable traffic north into Lakeshore at all hours of the day and at night. I think we should discuss ways in which this might be enforced, perhaps a camera recording license plates, or at a minimum, a sign touting the fine and loss of points that would go to violators. Finally, at the same time, I think a no left-hand turn sign should be installed on Highland to try to minimize the traffic influx into the neighborhood south of Concordia. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck. Jack?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just run through the report, which will address a lot of the comments that were made. In terms of the request, this is a request from Lakeshore Chinooks on behalf of Concordia University with regard to the Capco Field. As the Mayor stated, this was approved by the Planning Commission back in December. Due to Board of Appeals action, there's a requirement now that it has to go also to Common Council for approval. The applicant is in front of us tonight requesting a change that would eliminate the condition that no new ninth inning would start after 9 p.m. and no extra inning start after 11 p.m. Currently, the condition reads that if there's a ninth inning and it hasn't started yet and it's 9 p.m., the game is technically supposed to be over at that point. The applicant is requesting that that be eliminated in its entirety. If there is a rain delay for an hour and they happen to be in the 8th inning, they like the opportunity to finish the game even though it's 9 p.m. The other request would be to allow that no new 9th inning start after midnight, and in no case shall the lights be on past 12:15. This will be allowed for up to 5 events per year. The applicant did provide us with a lot of light detail from the last 6 years that is done, I believe, in Iowa that monitors the lighting conditions, and they've done a really good job of having the lights turned off. I believe over 75% of the times the lights have been off prior to 11 p.m. The request to allow for this extended time frame is because of rain delays that are difficult to reschedule the next day or the following week. They're of a pretty compressed time schedule, And so they're asking just to be able to finish those games. And the final stipulation would be that in no event shall the lights be on after 12:15, so the game would have to end at that point. There was some comments made regarding monitoring, and we did monitor for the first 3 years, and the documents are in the report. After 2014, the staff felt that because everything was remaining in compliance, and I checked my records, I believe Kim checked her records, we did not have any documented complaints after that time. So we did request our site inspector to go out and just verify compliance, which we had no violations occur after that time frame. With regard to the crowd noise and the wind, you know, we don't have a very sophisticated system. I'll freely admit to that. We have a decibel reader that you could purchase at any electronics store. And we do go out and take measurements around the campus as deemed necessary. There is a condition, and it's up on the screen and in your packet as well. The original condition specifically stated that the public address system shall not exceed 65 dBA at the property line. So there is no requirement in the approval that dictates the amount of crowd noise. So when we do measure, we're not measuring for crowd noise, we're measuring for the PA system. I believe I think that's pretty much all the issues, I think, with compliance. You know, the lighting itself, the lighting was checked. There has been no trespass on neighboring properties. Absent any changes to the lighting itself, I don't anticipate that would change at all. I mean, the lights are static, they're not gonna move. And there are not very many neighboring properties within a reasonable distance of that field, so I don't see that as an issue. But we will, as the mayor stated, this will be going to Common Council in June, and the games will already be started at Capco Field prior to that meeting, so I will go out at that point and take some readings and document all those and have those available at the meeting in front of the Common Council in June. Staff does recommend approval. We did add a condition that basically states that after 11 p.m., the PA system would be only used for player introductions only. The applicant has stated that after extra inning games, typically the fan base is kind of eroded away during those late games, and the only noise is typically from the PA system. So we just put a condition on there that would limit that to just player introductions. No other types of music or noise could be played after that 11 p.m. deadline. So with that, we do recommend approval according to the conditions in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Mr. Keeson.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for having me.
Yep. Anything you want to add?
I think Jack stated it pretty well. Again, very rare occurrence that these are happening. By no means do we want to be there any later than we need to, but it's that 1 or 2 times a year where, with the way the teams travel, it becomes really challenging to reschedule some of these games. And we've found that, I mean, I guess you never know until the game is played, but quite often these games can be resolved within another inning or so, and the opportunity to finish those games just would make things a lot easier for us as we go through our tight season. We play 72 games in 76 days, in case you know, so half of those are at home and half are on the road. So there's very little time to make up those extra days because the team quite literally is just not around. So that's majority of the reason for the request, and we certainly agree to the stipulation of putting the PA system down to introductions only. If that can be less, that can be as well. We can turn it down because, again, as of 11 o'clock, given the nature of our family-friendly entertainment, most parents have taken the kids off, and it's just usually a handful of diehards left. So, you know, I don't think crowd issue would really be a concern much past 10:30, 11 o'clock as usual. So,
Any comments on the use of the PA system, the noise from the PA system? You monitor that as well, don't you?
correct. Yeah, we've got an individual who's checked. Concordia's asked us to do it every once in a while as well, and he is in the that type of business. He does concerts and things like that, so he's got the right equipment, and he'll take a walk and check the sounds as well as we raise it and lower it and have it at our line that we usually keep it at. So again, I'm entering my 3rd season, so I haven't seen the whole evolution of this team come through, but I know in our 2 seasons it was done in my 1st season at request of Concordia, and all checked out well.
Okay, thank you. Commissioners?
Do you have any historical data as to how many games do go past 11 or 12 or?
Sure. Well, not past 11 because that's when we've had to stop recently. But as far as the Chinooks go, if we look at the results, I think they're in here. I don't know.
It's in the report.
It averages 1 to 2 a year, and most often that's because of some sort of rain delay in the front end. I would say there aren't many occurrences where it's just because the game is going like a 18 inning game.
Yep.
It's usually because we had some sort of delay on the front end, which just kind of backs everything up. But most often because of darkness, it's been, like I said, on average, I'd say 1 to 2 out of 36 games a year.
And second question, you mentioned you got the line where you like to keep the PA system. As a former Chinooks ticket holder, you go to some games and there weren't very many people there, and I can imagine that you wouldn't need the PA system as loud. However, you do have some events where you've got a pretty substantial crowd. I'm just asking the question, do you increase the level for those types of games when you've got more significant crowd noise?
We shouldn't. I can't say 100% that doesn't happen, but it's something that I can certainly check on. But ideally, no, we would hit that high level, and that's where we should stay at.
Obviously, my point is I'm trying to get at the point of if we're testing on days that there's not much crowd noise, you don't have to have the PA system loud versus a sold-out crowd, and suddenly you're cranking it up so people can hear it.
Okay.
So.
Yep. I'm making note of that.
Mr. Strelchak.
Jack, is PA typically measuring, is it crowd noise and PA, or?
Well, we had this discussion back when the original approval was, and that I think the decision was that we're not going to be able to control crowd noise, and so we stuck with just the limit on the PA itself. That's the only variable we could really control with this whole, with the process. So, and that's what we've been checking. It's hard. It would be really difficult for us to determine when there's going to be a large crowd versus a smaller crowd at a game, and set that up for inspection. So. We go out there on a typical night and just do our readings. And again, like I said, I'll go out there sometime in June. I'll probably pick a Friday night or whatever as a game and just go out and take the readings. But we're just looking at just trying to pick up the PA levels versus any kind of cheering or things like that.
I think cheering's a little beyond their control. I mean, if
Yes.
the crowd's a little more boisterous than the PA. The PA is just the biggest concern. I wanted to make sure that the PA was what was actually being measured, maybe in addition to crowd noise, just to get benchmark on that. I'm a little torn on this one. I'll be completely honest. I mean, I absolutely love the Chinooks, and I think it's a wonderful asset to the community. Not just that area of town; it's to the whole community. And I think it is the family-friendly type activity that brings the right type of people into Mequon to fill our restaurants, go shopping, come in, enjoy the city, and hopefully maybe someday decide to buy land here or invest in Mequon and stay. What is troubling to me though is as you're comparing the use is you've got an institutional use in a residential neighborhood, and then you've got 72 games in a 76-day period, and just kind of counting down even in the beginning of July on the last year's schedule. I mean, there was a game on the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th. You skip the 8th, 9th, and 10th, and it's 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, and I'm sorry, I'm looking at the wrong days.
So those are home and away.
I mean, home and away. I mean, you have a pretty good series of events, and as neighbors are. I don't know that neighbors planned on that much activity in a stadium when they bought their homes. Whether they, I'm sure they realized they were buying next to an institutional use, but. As a university, the heavy use of a heavy baseball season with that many games, I understand why we're getting letters, or, we got a couple letters of concern and why we had a resident speak out. What I'm trying to do is find balance. I don't know if there's the perfect say yes to everything on your proposal, and I'd encourage commissioners to maybe, be reasonable and allow those games to be played. However, I don't really want to necessarily see carte blanche be given to, 5 games when they need 1 and 2, just to, not have those few games postponed throughout the season. I understand rain delays come up. I respect that. And I'd like to see the game played into completion, but on a weeknight, if I've got stadium noise with announcements and PAs, and I've got young kids, and I need to go to work on the next day, and I've got a game that goes on till, midnight, I'm gonna be a little annoyed as a neighbor and exhausted myself. I think that's too late. So I'm waiting to see kind of which way the commissioners take discussion on this and what we can maybe come up with as far as, some real good, healthy discussion on really what's right for the neighborhood, but also allows for the support of this great business within our community as well. So I'd like to mirror what the resident says, and I'd like to make sure that we add a condition in on there on game nights that from whatever inning the Chinooks feels reasonable, maybe seventh inning and beyond, we've got somebody out there making sure, directing traffic to make sure that there's no right turn on Lakeshore Drive. If this is a heavy problem, especially on Chinooks nights, if you have people out there directing traffic on those nights, that would mitigate the game time concern coming forth on this issue. I'd like to encourage a third-party independent test of this every year, covered by the cost of the Chinooks, versus having the city go out. I don't think the city was able to keep up with the testing, and I don't think that's right by the residents. We need to make sure that it's tested and monitored, as we said, in our conditions as we put forth as a governing body. Otherwise, we put conditions that we don't plan on following through on. I think staff had good intent. I'd like to stand behind them and, not demean their efforts. However, I think a little more diligent reporting and a diligent monitoring on this would be appropriate. From what I've seen, everything's in compliance. It's really just a check as we go. So I'm not anticipating any issues coming up with sound levels, but if there are issues, they are there, and the residents know that the city's doing their part for the agreement of having a heavy evening user with a PA system and lights in their neighborhood. They're covering their backs as well.
Becky Schaefer.
I feel like the last time Concordia was here, we were talking about the business school. I think I've been in the commission, and Concordia's been in front of us 2 to 3 times, and every time there's a lot of neighbor feedback in advance and at the meeting. And I remember saying this before, on paper, a university is a great neighbor to have, and yet we continue to get feedback about it, which makes me question. I feel like there's got to be something broader that we look at with the traffic for sure, but specifically, I guess in this case, about the noise. I agree with what Alderman Strelchek said about, the Chinooks being a good addition to our community and bringing in, commercial business that our area businesses need. However, I would say that what was decided back in 2009, 2010 is, to me, the extent of what should be given in an area where there's a residential area, a residential neighborhood zoning butting up against this specific use. And I feel like if this were a conditional use grant, I would argue that it's harming the general welfare of the neighbors. Summer is the time that people want to be out and enjoying the property that they are investing in our community, and that happens to also be the time where we have 72 games in 76 days or what have. I mean, it's very, as you said yourself, that's why you're asking for this. It's very compressed, but it's
Half
also
of which
during
are
the
home.
time frame that these neighbors are hoping to be out enjoying their property. I will let you speak in a second. Sound carries over water, and with Lake Michigan adjacent, I don't have a decibel measuring machine, but I think it's reasonable to propose that perhaps even what you're measuring is not adequately capturing what's going on in the broader area because of what's happening over the water. I live nowhere near Homestead, and on Friday nights in the fall, I can hear the football games very clearly just because the river is between my house and Homestead. So that's a much smaller body of water than Lake Michigan is. So my recommendation to the council would be to deny this in its entirety. I feel like there's got to be a way to manage those additional 5 games without causing further impact on the surrounding neighbors.
I just want to make a point. It's 36 home games. We
Yeah.
play 72 games total, 36 road,
So
36
half of
home.
the summer.
Yeah, I just
All
want to so it's 36 games
Thank you for
total
clarifying.
at Concordia.
Commissioner Lemke.
I think I'd like to see them find a way to finish these games. It sounded like most of the complaints from people I talked to was all about noise. I'd like to see us get a little more strict and say that at 10 o'clock, the PA be limited to player introductions, and that 11 o'clock it gets turned off completely. I think that would be a compromise. I think the people that don't want to listen to any of that noise, at 11 o'clock it shuts off, and the few diehards know who's up to bat, and we'd be shut off at that point.
Commissioner Parrish.
I like that idea. So we can continue that in a sec. I'm glad I shared some of the sentiment of my commissioners. I was also torn on the subject. I feel that Concordia is one of the best assets we have as a community. Ranks right up there with Children's Hospital and some of the other recent developments we've had here that just make this a great place to live. And then you put yourselves in the shoes of the neighbors and you can really sympathize with them. You know, I have young kids too, and I guess I wouldn't care for that either. You know, for the people who've been there a long time, I guess that's different than maybe the people who moved there a year ago. But there is that differentiation. When you're talking about 11 o'clock versus 12 o'clock, it's already so late anyways. So my mind's falling in let's try to work with them because we're already in this situation, and so let's. You know, I think it's pretty embarrassing for a college of this caliber to have to be shutting down games with a hard stop at that time. So I'd rather try to come up with that difficult compromise, which I think what Rick came up with was creative. There were other examples in the letters in the packet that were unacceptable, like you had people cleaning up the stadium, just blasting speakers, and I'm sure that was like, maybe. Did you want to speak to that? Okay.
No, I mean, is it at nighttime or I can
Before and after games, just be setting up, and
Yeah.
I mean, that shouldn't be happening.
Well, before the game, I mean, I can say like batting practice would start at
Sure.
3:30, 4 o'clock, and that's when I know they'd put music on. Typically before that, on a game day, generally there's no music on because we usually don't arrive until about 2:30 to the stadium for the most part. As far as other days, I mean, that's something that I can certainly make a note of, to keep more of an eye on just randomly turning music on to be out there and work.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I
that's-
don't want to be overly restrictive with our conditions, but I mean, I think just out of a courtesy to the neighbors, when it's not game time, there shouldn't be blasting music, disrupting the neighbors. Which brings up my final point, which is, I agree with Becky. It's like every time there's an issue, or every time there's a development at Concordia, which I'm very happy to see, unfortunately neighbors come and there's just always something. And I think Concordia can do a little more with neighborhood relations and neighborhood meetings and just trying to interact with the neighbors better, whether it's the bluff or the games or the tennis courts or, you know, I think when there's a late game, you should be like offering free tickets to a game or just something. Something as a goodwill gesture to these neighbors who are inconvenienced with the kids. So, because you are a great institution, and we're all really happy to have you here. So,
We offer tickets on our firework night to all the
What's that?
surround. On our firework night, we offer tickets to all the neighbors in the area. We drop them off with a little letter saying that the game's coming up, just so that one's aware. But that's we do that once a year.
John?
Logistically, is there any issue with you not having PA on after, if we say 10 o'clock for announcements?
My concern is some of the pitching things we have to do. We have to make some announcements when pitchers hit a certain limit. After 11 o'clock, I see no issue with having the PA turned off. That's fair. I can handle that. That's not a problem at all. So I would certainly agree to that.
Including player announcements?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What about between 10 and 11, if we limited it to just the player announcements?
I think we still see a decent crowd at that time, and I could see just kind of impacting the spirit of the game and the entertainment level of it all. So I guess I would prefer not to, if at all possible. 11 o'clock, certainly I would be in agreement with that. But if we could keep it at that, would be preferred. If we have to talk about otherwise,
But the bulk of your games are done by 10, aren't they?
they should be. I mean, we technically our late games start at 6:35, so you assume about 3 hours. I mean, they are college kids. Sometimes things take a little longer. So by 9:30, ideally, that's when we're done. That's what we all hope for, because I want to go home. But yeah, typically, I'd say 3 hours is hitting kind of your high-end average, if not hopefully a little sooner than that. But
Try and keep this moving along. I'll make a motion to approve per staff's recommendations. However, there is no PA system after 11 PM, not even per player announcements.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Yeah, I got some questions, hold on.
Pardon?
I got some questions, hold on.
Yeah. I got a couple of things I want to say too. The request before us is really minor. It affects maybe 1 or 2 games a year. So it's really, there's really no harm in allowing them to do this, I feel. What we are hearing, though, is that the existing operation, and obviously the future operation, people are aggrieved by the sound. And so the suggestion, it gives us the opportunity here to put a condition on it, as you did, that no PA after 11 p.m. No PA at all after 11 p.m., that's your, okay. I think that'll help the neighborhood. The other thing is monitoring the sound is staff's responsibility. It's not the university's responsibility. So if we're going to do something about that, and I think we should hire a third party to go out there and review the sound levels to see what they are. And I think that should be a city responsibility to do that, because it was our responsibility to do it in the first place. And so I would ask you if you add that to our recommendation that we hire a third-party sound engineer to go and check the sound levels, let's say twice a season, and give us a report. I don't think that's going to cost a lot of money. And then at least it'll be independent. So they're not going to criticize our staff, they're not going to criticize the Chinooks when they see the sound report. The other thing that was brought up was traffic. Now, I don't know if you want to go out there and direct people to turn left on Lakeshore Drive. You know, you certainly can do that, it's your property. The no left turn sign or the no right turn sign, that's a city law enforcement, city traffic sign. That's the city's responsibility to enforce that. And there currently is a sign on Lakeshore. There's not one on Highland. And we can specify that we put one on Highland. And then it's up to us to ask our police force to go out there and do routine monitoring or enforcement of that sign. So that doesn't need to be a part of this action here. That's something that we can ask
I'd like to respectfully disagree
our law enforcement.
on that one point, just from the standpoint that I agree with you 100%, it's the city's enforcement on our signs. However, I feel that traffic direction by the staff, by event staff, could completely mitigate that issue. I think it puts the city in an awkward situation where we're going to be sitting with a patrol car out there and we're going to be paying salaried officers to monitor traffic when the issue occurs during a baseball game exit. My recommendation for a condition on this is, by the seventh inning until the parking vehicles have exited, that they would have traffic direction to encourage proper use of that parking lot, proper exiting of the parking lot. That you'd basically have someone standing there saying you cannot make a right turn, you need to turn left. And that's a responsibility of the event staff. If you have a big event and you want to throw on a big event, you get volunteers to direct staff, to direct parking into an appropriate direction. This is no different. This is a professional or semi-pro baseball, and it's a big event and it's an exciting event, but they can control their parking. I don't think that falls on having an officer sitting outside of the stadium. I think that's awkward. And I don't think it relies on the residents to call and complain either, so. I'd like to request, if we could on that motion, that we'd add, parking direction by the 7th inning until parking vehicles have exited on event nights. And then I'd also like to add the stipulation that none of these games can go to midnight if it's not in a situation where there's a rain delay. The reason you're asking for this is for rain delay situations. If you have entertainment that's going to go late and the neighbors are going to listen to the entertainment from 3 o'clock until midnight, it's a 9-hour period in which they haven't gotten to relax and enjoy their homes. Games may be extended in rain delay situations only. No extra inning to start after X time. And then we put, no extra inning to start after 10:30. We've helped them, but limited it to, so this doesn't end up being 5 games with entertainment, and then this gets taken a little out of context.
It's extra innings too, though, not just rain.
Well, extra innings and rain, let them finish the game and play the game. That's the spirit of the game. You wanna honor the sport.
Weather delay?
Yeah, I would like to call it a weather delay.
Yeah, because it might be foggy, it might not be raining.
Yeah. Is that reasonable?
Weather delay?
Weather delay?
Weather delay? Sure.
What
Yeah.
about a tie? What if it's a tie game? I don't think we can limit it to that.
Weather delay. In a weather delay situation, they can
Extra
extend.
inning games continue? That's what, you're saying you don't want to see extra inning games?
If we approve this tonight, we've got to make sure that we've got a few things in place for the residents. So, if it's a weather delay game, which is the premise for coming forward to ask for this, we've just got it in writing that it's a weather delay situation. That's the only thing that can drive a midnight game. It's the only reason it can go past 11 o'clock at night. If they got tie games that go to 11 and they started at 6:30,
So
I struggle with
I
that.
believe I heard a request for a friendly amendment from the mayor, looking for a third-party independent sound
Sound
test
check.
twice a year. I would gladly accept that. I am not comfortable with the traffic condition, nor am I comfortable with the only a weather delay. I watched a Brewer game the other night, and there were 19 foul balls in a row from one player. And it became a very long game. Seriously, it was crazy. And I struggle if there's no sound after 11 p.m., let them finish the game, even if it goes to 12. We're not hearing complaints from the neighbors that this is, that the lights are bothering them at 11:30. It's the sound. We've mitigated the sound after 11 p.m., and I think that's fair to let them finish the game. I'm not comfortable putting a restraint due to weather or ties or anything like that. Logistically, for them to replay these games when they've got 4 days of non-games, I think it's very difficult for them to finish the game, or to reschedule the game. So I'm fine with the friendly amendment regarding the independent sound testing twice a year, and I guess the city will figure out how to pay for that. So that's where I stand.
Well, and I have a question. So has the city done any testing of sound beyond? Has the city done any testing beyond the confines of the university, say half a mile south, half a mile north?
Well, if you look at the test results, we do look at the cul-de-sac at the end of the road north of Concordia, because the condition is that it's at the property line. So we check it at proximity around the stadium itself. So yes.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with where they're testing.
And my comment about enforcement, it's not simply the Chinooks games.
No, I know.
People complain about cars on a daily basis.
Right.
And so, and people complain about speeding on all the roads they live on, and our police can't be everywhere at once. But, if we can get the police out there once in a while to check, it could be in the afternoon for Concordia students, which doesn't affect you. You're with the Chinooks. But if we can get our police out there to do a little bit of enforcement on that signage, the word will get around, and it might help. Commissioner Lemke.
I still would like to see us help out the neighbors a little more and limit the public address to player introductions only after 10 o'clock. I think 10 o'clock is late enough that we could limit them to the player introductions and help out the homeowners a little bit, not hearing post-game music, things like that.
I'm gonna second what John had said,
11 o'clock.
yes.
So we have a
So we
motion,
can take the vote, or,
friendly amendment, and a second to the friendly amendment.
And another amendment from Commissioner Lemke?
I'd like to stick with the 11 PM no, so.
Right, but he could make
I'd
them.
like to add no additional sound besides player introductions after 10 at 11 o'clock would be a firm cutoff.
And I don't want to make that part of my motion, so that would
Right.
be how we vote.
You want to make that an additional motion?
Yes.
Okay. Is there a second? You will second that?
Yeah.
Okay.
One more.
Okay.
Let's just keep going.
Go ahead.
The lights, I do think that Mr. Reynolds, I believe, spoke about the lights, and I think in some of the correspondence we got from neighbors last month when this was on the agenda, the lights were mentioned. It's not gonna impact, I have a friend that lives on Hemlock, right, that's a couple, like a mile, let's say, north of Concordia. I've been at her house during games, we can hear them, we can't necessarily see the lights. But for people who are immediately south and immediately north, I just wanna make sure that when we're monitoring the sound, that we're also monitoring the lights, because whatever we're deciding here does not, we can be quiet, it doesn't change the light pollution that might be going on with the neighbors.
We can check the lights.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot more straightforward of a measurement, and I don't anticipate any dispersion off the Concordia campus. It's a lot easier to
Easier to
direct
measure,
that.
but it's still,
Yeah.
it was mentioned, and I
Yeah.
can see where,
Yeah.
I get it,
I mean, you'll see the lights, just like you do when you're at Homestead or whatever,
Yep.
the football game lights, you see those from far away, but as far as it trespassing onto somebody else's property, it'd be very difficult in that setup.
because the standard is so lenient for what I mean.
No, our requirements is that there's no trespass,
That there's
basically.
zero light impact on a neighboring,
Right.
an abutting
Yeah.
property.
But there's only a few neighbors directly to the north, and there's a fairly significant
Buffer between
hedgerow
Lakeshore
of arborvitae there, and to the south, obviously, its buildings are in the way at that point. So there's only like 2 or 3 properties that would be impacted by an actual dispersion of light on their property.
Yeah, which is fair, I just know it was mentioned by more than one neighbor
Yeah.
in their comments, which is different. Being able to see the lights up in the sky is different than the light being on their properties. That's probably a good distinction for,
And there's also other lighting on that campus where, I mean, we have to go check it once the lights are on versus once the lights are off, because there's also gonna be parking lot lights
Lighting
and
and-
and you could have even soccer lighting on, which is not regulated at all under our ordinance if they have lights. I think the football has lights, I'm not sure, but, so we have to kind of look at that too, so. But I don't see the lighting as being an issue in terms of a dispersion issue at the neighboring properties.
no, as long as, I just didn't wanna disregard it, because
Right.
it actually was mentioned by more than one neighbor.
As Chinooks games are a lot of fun. I've certainly been to them.
Not making them as much fun as they really are right now, are we?
Yeah, it doesn't really sound like much fun, but they really are a lot of fun. And to your motion, I would say when I go to a Chinooks game, I'm home at 10 o'clock. It's over. And certainly the crowd involvement, the music, the entertainment that occurs, by 10 o'clock, half the people have left, and there's really no value in that music or that entertainment anymore, and it's strictly a baseball fan and a baseball game by that point. And I think you have every right to finish the game, but I would agree with Commissioner Lemke that, if we can stop the entertainment noise at 10 o'clock, that's a great benefit to the neighborhood in exchange for a couple of games a year that may last a little bit longer. So I would actually support that amendment.
My only comment to that would be is during the playoffs, the times I've been to them, the crowds are there. It is pretty lively, and it can be pretty lively. And again, that's why I asked the question, are they turning the PA system up even louder when there's larger crowds? But I think, I'm a little waver on that, whether I'd support that, amendment or not, but, because I think the playoff games, you don't have people leaving quite like you do in 80% of the games, so.
Winter playoffs.
Except for playoff games?
They're at the end of the year.
Do you want to just do that for regular season games?
Yeah, I'm good with that.
I mean, playoffs are
We
cool.
hope you make the playoffs.
4 for 6, so hopefully for 5.
So,
Okay, so Commissioner Lemke made a motion that no sound after 11, only player introductions after 10 for regular season games.
for regular, he said regular season. Do you accept that?
When do playoffs start?
The day after August 12th or whatever our season goes till August 12th this year, and then the playoffs would go through 13th through the 17th, depending if we continue to win. And yeah, it's 5 days, and only 2 to 3 max of those would be actually at our home field.
Okay. Anything else? All right, so we have a amendment to the main motion, Mr. Lemke's motion, which you know what it is. Robin, call the roll.
Which one are we voting on? Mason or Lemke?
First one.
Lemke?
Mr. Lemke's amendment to the main motion. You accepted my friendly amendment.
Right, but we didn't vote on it.
We didn't vote on his.
We have to vote on the amendment first, right?
You
You're
do?
saying?
Okay.
We're voting on Mr. Lemke's amendment.
Yeah.
Commissioner Baca,
Aye.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer,
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish,
We're voting on his first?
Yes, his first, because that will predicate the other one for some people, whether they want to support that or not.
I would support his if ours was voted down, so I don't want to vote no.
Do you want that condition in or not, Mr. Lemke's?
no.
Okay.
No?
Commissioner Stoker,
Aye.
Commissioner Lemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye?
Mayor Abendroth.
Aye.
7-1 vote passes.
Okay,
Amendment.
7-1. In the main motion,
I've just got one quick question on the main motion.
That's Stoker's motion.
go ahead.
Who's paying for it? Who's paying for the independent study?
I believe the city will do that. It's a staff responsibility.
Well, and I mean, in other cases, we have required that the
I'd like the applicant to pay for it.
applicant would pay for it. We would handle the contract and hire the engineer, but the cost would be borne on by the applicant. That's what we do, like with a traffic study or other types of studies that are done. But it's up to the commission, I guess, to make.
I would amend my amendment to have it stated that the applicant pays for the 2 sound tests annually.
Okay. There goes the price of a beer.
Second?
Okay. So we have the main motion to recommend approval with all the conditions that we've discussed. Call the roll.
Commissioner Baca,
Aye.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer,
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish,
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker,
Aye.
Commissioner Lemke,
Aye.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer,
No.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Mayor Abendroth.
Aye.
Vote passes 7-1.
7-1. Thank you. This will go to the Common Council June 12th. We'll probably have a whole nother discussion.
Thank you.
Is it fair to just summarize, since that was a little bit convoluted for anyone who's here, because I think there's neighbors here, what we just recommended? Can we do that?
You
I think I
recommend
can summarize.
approval?
I think
Do you want me to do it, or do you want to do it?
Go for it.
All right, so what's now happening is the applicant is going to be required to pay for 2 independent third-party tests twice a year. We are going to have no PA system after 11 o'clock at any of the games. After 10 p.m., there is only going to be player announcements, except during the playoffs, in which case they can still have the entertainment through after 10 p.m. until 11.
And then all the other conditions in the staff report.
Correct.
Except for the number 4, basically, is being modified.
Yep, correct.
Okay. Mr. Keeson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Are you sure?
What's that?
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
And good luck with
We'll see you in a couple of weeks. All right, the next item is John Mickelson for Granville Estates. The applicant is seeking preliminary plat and development agreement approval for a proposed 7-lot development for a 40-acre property located immediately south of 14013 Granville Road. We have one person who wants to speak on this issue, so let me call on Mr. Ed Zaleski.
Evening. Ed Selesky. I live at 13613 Granville Road, which is on the northeast corner of Granville and Bonnewell, and my property is directly south of the subject property up above. I had a couple concerns with this, and I understand this is not a conservation subdivision, and it is traditional 5 acres, lots or bigger, which is within the boundaries of what the city requires. The issues that I have, though, are, first of all, I have a shallow well, approximately 50 feet, and my first concern is how this affects the water table. I spoke to Greg Rowenhouse at the DNR and provided that this is not anything that involves a high-capacity well, so wells over 10 gallons per minute or 6-inch case size. The DNR really doesn't have a lot of stipulation for that. So my concern is if there starts to be problems with the water table after this is built, what is the fix for this? I certainly wouldn't want to have to put a new well in at my own expense for the benefit of this project going forward. I did speak with Mr. Mickelson for a bit before this. He has indicated that, and I don't want to speak for him, that these will be deeper wells, and he doesn't believe that the water table will be affected. But I just want to know who is going to cover the cost of this if it is. So that is one thing I would like for you to address. Second thing is they are going to have to bring power to the subdivision, and my question there is how it is getting there. Currently, there is not power in that general area for that. My power comes from the east side of the road. It goes across the west side of the road to my house, and it pretty much ends there. If it were being aerial, then it would have to go up the road somewhere and cross over. And my concern with that is that it doesn't happen directly in my backyard, that there not be a power pole there. Anything north of the entrance to my field, if they put a power pole over there, I have no objection to that. However, just in the general vicinity of the area that I use as my yard, I would like to avoid seeing one of those there. Plus, I have several large spruce trees there, and I don't want those interfered with, along with, don't want it going over my barn foundation. I did speak with Nicole Warwick at We Energies, who is the individual that would be responsible for designating how and where the power gets there, and she says that this hasn't come to her first and that they would work that out if this gets approval. The area that you're looking at here is largely a large basin, and there is part of it that is a swamp, and with the heavy rains that we have, I went and looked at this this afternoon after all the rains have stopped. The culvert that passes from one side of the road to the other is a 24-inch culvert. It was approximately 6 inches full, leaving it 18 inches from the top. If you go to the lowest part of the road, the water level is 18 inches from the road, meaning if you get that culvert full to the top, you will be close to having water spilling over the road. And my question becomes, how does this affect any of the drainage and the water retention that might be affected from this? And is there a plan in place to address that? And has that been considered? I had also noticed that there may be widening of the road proposed possibly. And again, I don't know where that would be and how far up that would come. I have several specimen trees that are 10 feet from the road, and these are trees that are over 100 years old, and I don't want to see that impacted in any way. So that is one thing I would like to know that will not happen if this is approved. And then this will be a subdivision, which most subdivisions have rules to it. And I just want there to be a full understanding for whoever buys these homes that you're in farm country, you're gonna smell animals, you're gonna smell waste from the animals, there's gonna be burn pits and fires and things of that nature. So just so that whoever buys this or moves in has that full understanding. So those are the big issues that I would like to see addressed with this. The water table being first and foremost concern to me, and knowing that if you approve this and if there's a problem with my well, somebody is going to be compensating the cost of this. So if you want to address any of that now, you know, please do, or if you want to get back to me, that's fine too.
No, we're going to go and let staff give a report, and they've heard your questions. I think they can answer them.
Okay.
This is a request for a 7-lot subdivision. This is just immediately south of 14013 North Granville Road. Lot sizes here range from 5 acres to 8 acres in size. Access to the subdivision will be gained from Granville Road. There's a public road showing on the plat, Granville Court, which will provide access to the lots. 2 of the lots, lots 3 and 5, do not have direct access onto the court, so they'll have to access will be gained through a private easement through lots 2 and 6 respectively. In terms of the code, it does comply with our 5-acre requirements in the R1 zoning district. It also complies with our 300-foot average lot width in the code. The plan does show a couple stormwater ponds located on lots 6 and 7. Those will have to have easements for the city in case the ponds are not being maintained. As you can see from the plat in the southeast corner, there's a little wetland complex as well. The delineation for that wetland complex is beyond 5 years old, so we'll require an updated wetland delineation prior to signing off on the preliminary plat. If the wetland does change in size where it impacts the design of the plat, the applicant is aware that he would have to return to Planning Commission for approval. The applicant is also showing a 100-foot landscape preservation easement along Granville Road. The applicant is intending on providing a more of a rural landscape along that road and wants to make sure that you know, potential owners of Lot 1 and 7 do not do anything that would be inconsistent with the rural character of the subdivision. Only issue, well, I also would say that our city forester has walked this site and there's no specimen trees impacted by the development. The only other planning related issue I mentioned in the report is this issues of connectivity. We do typically look at connectivity for all new subdivisions. I did bring in the ortho just to kind of give you a better perspective of the situation. The parcel in question is in this location here. The only potential area for connectivity would be to the west. There's a large 70-acre farm in this location. I spoke with the applicant. He does not want to connect to the neighboring subdivision, but I felt it was important for at least the Planning Commission to understand the situation at hand. There is this entire 70-acre parcel is accessed through Bonnywell Road, basically through a 10-foot driveway location. So this would provide an opportunity to provide access to that subdivision in the future. There's been no development inquiries with regard to that plan, and I don't know of any development plan with regard to that subdivision. If this western parcel would develop, there would be an opportunity to connect through there as well. As you can see here, this shows wetland and floodplain off of Bonnywell Road, and the majority of frontage that this property has is within the wetland or floodplain. So I just wanted to bring that up to the Commission's attention. The applicant is not proposing any connection to the property. We did not recommend any, but I just wanted to make the Commission aware. Majority of the questions or comments made by the neighbor are pretty much engineering related, so I'll have Bridget address those as we go on. Thanks.
So I'll start with the questions at hand, and then I'll run through the remaining items on the engineering report. So as we've heard with several other subdivisions that aren't in the sewer or water service area, that wells are entirely under the jurisdiction of the DNR. The city is not involved in any part of the well approval process. As for the power to the subdivision, that is entirely done by We Energies and is done through easements. So the poles are either in the right-of-way or through an easement on a property. So if there's a property owner that does not want a pole or an overhead line on their property, they do have the opportunity to work with We Energies to not have it on their property. As for the 24-inch crossroad culvert, this development, as well as any other development in the city, would have to make sure that the pre-development, and in this case, pre-settlement conditions of the stormwater management, so what it looks like now is a wooded field, that runoff would have to be matched in the post-developed condition. So they do have to do stormwater management, and that stormwater management would dictate that they cannot increase the water running off this property after it's developed. So there would be no increase to that culvert than what is already there. As for the road widening, I believe what the resident is referring to is the acceleration and deceleration lanes and the bypass lane. So those would also be entirely within the city right-of-way, and they don't extend beyond Lot 1 or Lot 7. So it's fully within the site area. Those are standard requirements for all subdivisions in the city. In the past, there have been some exemptions granted based on traffic. At this time, the applicant has not provided any traffic data that would allow for an exemption. So our staff recommendation does say that an acceleration and deceleration lane as well as a bypass lane would be required for this particular subdivision. And then as far as the concerns with the country living, that is, I'd say more of a planning and development item versus engineering.
And I do have up on the screen, the applicant did provide a drawing that shows XL-decel lanes off of Granville Road and the required island in the median. They did not show a bypass lane, and I believe they would like to have a conversation about that as well. Thank you.
Then the last couple of items that weren't specifically addressed yet, Jack did touch a little bit on the driveway locations. We are requesting that the driveway locations be shown on the plat, and that is done so that there aren't 7 driveways all accessing the cul-de-sac, so that the potential homeowners know where their driveway access points would be. I think that covered all of my items.
Other than that, we also have a development agreement that will go on to Common Council that dictates all the design construction requirements as well as the allowance to build one's home prior to getting final plat approval. So with that, we do recommend approval according to the conditions in the report.
Thank you, Jack. Mr. Mickelson.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a comment on that area, there is a fairly amount of, it is a high groundwater area, which is why you probably have a surface well. So I'm sure my wells are not gonna be a surface well. They'd probably be 200 to 300 feet down. I'm not an expert, but I would believe that I would be in a different aquifer than yours. I'd have to get more information on that. But that is a high groundwater area, so I don't expect, but regionally, I can't say what would happen to your well, frankly. I mean, it might not be just from these 7 lots, frankly. It might be from the whole region that affects it. And 7 lots is pretty minimal in the amount of water that, none of these would be high capacity. I mean, obviously, this is just residential area. We would be doing stormwater retention, as Bridget said, so post and pre-development is gonna equalize out. On the cul-de-sac, we show easements purposely so that we don't have a lot of driveways off the cul-de-sac. We would only have 2 driveways off the cul-de-sac because it's difficult to plow cul-de-sacs as well, and we're cognizant of that for the city standpoint. So that's why we have a couple of lots would have a shared driveway off the cul-de-sac. The last item that I'd like to address is that all the country subdivisions that I've seen in the Mequon, like the Parade model a couple of years ago, my Highlands development, on Highland Road, Highgate subdivision, Wildwood subdivision on the east side. We met with the city, we agreed to add the island and the acceleration, deacceleration lines, but with the traffic on Granville Road, I don't see the need for a bypass lane and the widening of Granville Road for that purpose. So I'd like to discuss that, because a bypass lane is meant so you could turn left if there's 3, 4, 5, 8 cars coming at you. There's not that type of traffic demand. I did check on the Department of Transportation website. The last traffic study was 2010. It's very irrelevant. It's dated. And I mean, I could go back to that and get another traffic study, but just common sense wise, Granville Road's a less traffic road than Highlands or Wildwood or a lot of the other subdivisions that have been approved. So I'd like not to have a bypass lane and enlarge it. And this gentleman seems to not want the enlargement of Granville Road either.
If I might add one thing.
Yes.
I'm not an expert on wells either and
Yeah.
water tables, so I have that concern.
Please address the chair. We don't encourage debate between people.
Yeah.
Sorry. I'm not an expert on wells and water tables and such, but I do have that concern. So if something could be done just to address that in some manner, just so I have some assurances that if there are any problems, that I will have some assistance in correcting that, if it is due to the drop in the water table. That's my only concern with that.
Okay, I appreciate that, but as staff said, the use of well water is regulated by the Department of Natural Resources.
Understood.
The city doesn't have anything to do with that. This is a 40-acre parcel. It's within their rights to put 7 homes there and to drill wells,
Right, but
just like it was to drill a well at your property.
what I am saying is that when my well was put in 1960, there were 2 or 3 other wells in that area, and it has functioned ever since then. And if there are any issues with the water table with encroaching developments, I just want to know that this would be addressed some way, shape, or form, that I wouldn't bear the full brunt of this.
I can't make any assurances of what will happen. You're speculating, and I'm not going to do that.
Well, there's no assurances, that's the thing. So,
You're saying what happens if your well goes dry, and we have no idea why your well would go dry.
Correct.
it hasn't in the last 55 years.
And I don't know what happens if your well goes dry and someone says it's John's fault. John's pumping his water. That's why the city's not involved. It's a DNR.
And when my well was put in, a 50-foot well was more than adequate. Now, will it still be adequate after the area starts to grow? I don't know.
I imagine it will.
Is there any expectation then that I would be assisted in any costs that I might incur because of that, if I need a deeper well and a new well?
We could hook you up to the city water system.
Not out there.
Okay, well, we can make it out there. You don't want that, okay. Take this back to the commission. The Highlands, you're familiar with the Highlands. It's behind the street that I live on. What's that, 8 homes?
9 homes.
9 homes, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I don't even know they're there. It's a beautiful subdivision. Mr. Mickelson does a very good job, takes very good care of his properties. So you're not going to find any problems with anything that he does. With regards to the bypass lane, the Highlands doesn't have a bypass lane. It's on Highland Road. I go back and forth there at least once a day, and I have never seen anyone turn in left. I'm sure they do, but I've never witnessed any sort of traffic issue at this entrance to that subdivision. And he does a beautiful job of landscaping the front of it, which I assume you're doing here as well. So this is a fine addition to the city, in my opinion.
Just out of curiosity, why are you looking for this bypass lane? Is there do you have traffic data that we don't, or is this just a city requirement?
So in our meeting with the applicant, we were in favor of providing some traffic counts, some justification of why a bypass lane isn't needed. So as the applicant had indicated, the traffic counts are from 2010. In the morning rush and the evening rush, there are significant cars on that area, to the point where when our city forester is removing brush and trees, they do have to provide traffic control along that area and be cognizant of the higher traffic volumes. So we just wanted to make sure that we were looking at current traffic data and whether or not it's warranted. So staff would be in favor of evaluating this on a traffic basis, so that we are consistent throughout all of the developments. An example that I can give of an area where we did do that was Go Right Way, just a year or so ago, was also required to do a bypass lane, and they amended their traffic pattern so that they only have right turns in, so they don't have a left-in bus. So it has been done in the past that we have looked at the traffic patterns and not put in bypass lanes, but we need to have the data to back up that determination so that we're consistent throughout the city.
Any other comments?
I thought that was a great explanation by Bridget. I'd be in favor of bypassing the bypass lane, subject to further data, as far as amending the staff's conditions. And then as far as the well concern, we hear that quite often when there's well developments, but does that need to actually be in, subject to DNR approval? Does that need to be in the conditions, or is that just inherent in our code, that any development in a well in a service area needs to get DNR approval?
That's a state requirement.
Okay, so we don't need it in here. Okay. Thanks.
So forgive my ignorance here, but is there any way to get the traffic data you're looking for shy of a traffic study?
No.
They can do sort of an abbreviated traffic study where they do counts and do a peak study analysis, but it's still ultimately a traffic study. It's not to the extent of the traffic and parking study that we did on the Civic campus area. It's much smaller than that, but it's still essentially a traffic study.
To
Just
the
like a
applicant.
peak hour study.
Yeah.
To the applicant. Any idea what a traffic study would cost you?
No, I don't have any idea. Common sense tells me that it's not a very populated road, but
I agree. I think
that's
we're gonna
common
do-
sense, and I don't know the cost of it.
I agree. I think you're gonna do a traffic study to find out you don't need a bypass lane.
Well,
You're
and
probably right.
And you also have the farmer across the street who doesn't want a bypass lane cutting off his field, so.
I'd make a motion to accept this per staff recommendation, excluding the bypass lane requirement.
I'll second that.
Do we want to hear from the?
Motion, a second, Commissioner Schaefer.
You bring my water. I was gonna say the only reason I think Bridget tried to give good rationale as to why we would do the traffic study, and that's such that we're being consistent, right? So that we're not setting a precedent and saying, I totally agree. I don't think that there will be a need for one. However, if we say, oh, we don't need it here, someone else is going to come in. I think we always, whatever decisions we make, we're setting a precedent for someone else to come in and say, but you didn't require them to do it, so.
I would counter that, ask how many subdivisions, Hawks Glen, how many of those did really require traffic studies? I don't know historically, but I suspect that there's been several subdivisions in rural Mequon that weren't required to do that. And I could be completely incorrect, but
Yes,
That's
I've
before
been.
Bridget's time. She can't.
Yeah, Bridget can't speak to that, but I can probably say we haven't been all that consistent with enforcing that requirement in the past. The only one that I could think of that had the bypass was Highlander, which is a little bit more of a dense subdivision. But there's got to be, somewhere along the line, there's going to be a break where it's required, and I guess that's what the traffic analysis is supposed to tell, so.
So we pick a really
Yeah,
rural one to start with.
Highlander's a couple hundred homes.
Well, 100.
Okay,
110.
100 homes. That's a big difference with 7.
Well, I agree,
I
just
think
at
7
one point.
falls under whatever limit we come up with anywhere, so.
I think whatever we do here, we minimize the impact on the neighbors, and I think that traffic bypass lane, I don't think it's fitting for that road. We haven't had a neighbor come forward and say that they're concerned with traffic and getting in and getting out safely, or accidents being created. even after this discussion, I don't see any, you know, like people shaking their heads or going, oh my goodness. I agree with Commissioner Stoker that I think that if we did enforce that he had to have a, you know, full traffic study done, we would just enforce it to know that he didn't need the bypass lane. If there's an abbreviated way that we can do it that's cost effective, so we dot our i's and cross our t's, I'm open to staff recommendations and definitely would listen to that position. Again, you know, I still probably wouldn't want to see it unless we did need it for a safety standpoint, from a resident standpoint. You know, addressing a couple of the issues, you know, I'm glad the DNR monitors wells. I really don't feel that 7 homes are going to drain the water table too much. I can't speak to how deep or how shallow wells are supposed to be. But what I would ask is, you know, the staff, if you do have any, you know, drilling data or anything that comes forward to share that with the resident. You know, he is obviously concerned about it, and it'd be nice to have some staff communication with the residents on that level. Drainage, again, I'm addressing, this is in my district, so I'm addressing a couple things, maybe a little redundantly, but I'd like to have it covered. Drainage with the stormwater detention ponds, you know, again, is going to address the watershed. In many cases, what we've seen is that it's actually better after the drainage has been done. The stormwater detention ponds are in than prior. It is from a pre-development state, which is nice because we have some benchmarks that are as it is now. Power, again, I can't speak for We Energies in which way they would go in. If they don't have an easement on your property, they would have to reach out to you and compensate you to put things on your property for power lines to go to the subdivision. So you would be communicated with, you know, by them directly, and I'm comfortable with the fact that you'd effectively evaluate with We Energies what would be best for you. And I talked about the road widening and the rural character. You know, I'm right by a dairy farmer. He's a great neighbor. I do notice the dairy smell on occasion, but I'm not calling City Hall to complain about it because I moved in next to a dairy farm. I mean, you move out to rural Mequon, expect that it's going to be rural. People do burn. If it's something legal within the city statutes, you'll obviously be able to continue to do that without any obstruction to the enjoyment of your home. So I'm comfortable with that as well. Occasionally you get a personality that wants to complain about everything that moves into a new subdivision. Unfortunately, that's the burden on that resident to bear that cross, I guess, for lack of better words. But, you know, I would expect, based on the way that this is laid out with full 5-acre lots and some being even larger than that, you know, as the mayor did mention, he does have a right to build this on that property based on, you know, the land being purchased. That is what it is currently zoned for. The PUD comes forward before this governing body just to make sure that stormwater detention's in place. It's the city's opportunity to make sure that your concerns are addressed with the stormwater detention, the drainage. We can hear your feedback on the water table, and that's why this does come before this governing body, so we can hear your input and give you feedback on that. The only one hanging out there is the water table. You do have a shallow well at 50 feet. I don't know what to tell you on that, but if they're saying they're going to 200 feet, my hunch is they are hitting a different aquifer down there as well. You did state publicly you have concern about it. You did bring it up. It is recorded on YouTube. So if you do have issues in the future, you do have some recourse that you brought that up as a general concern. Unfortunately, I think the burden of proof that it was the actual development that caused it would be on your shoulders coming forward. But again, you did bring up the concern to this governing body. So I think you're pretty well covered, you know, on several bases with this. I'm comfortable voting in favor for this development, you know, with the couple mentions that we have over here. So
You keep getting closer, so come on up.
Am I allowed to speak? I would like to read a statement that I believe all of you have in front of you.
Are you Robert Girock?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Dear Mequon Planning Commission members, my name is Robert Girock, and I own the farmland across the road from the proposed subdivision. My family has been on this farm for 6 generations, and my sons have an interest in continuing our business for a 7th generation. I have several concerns regarding the proposal that may adversely affect our operation. I would like to address these before the project moves forward. First, the main soil type on the proposed 40 40-acre site is OUB and OUB2, which is very tight, heavy clay. Our concern is that it will produce excessive amounts of runoff because of the compaction from development. This will make our fields no longer suitable for crop production. Lots 1 and 2 have elevations that may run to the road ditch and directly into our fields. We are also concerned that the soil which will not be able to handle the septic requirements of all 7 lots. Furthermore, lot sizes are at a minimum. With the wetlands involved, we feel 5 lots may be a more acceptable number. Our second concern is for the proposed changes to our side of the road. We will not tolerate a bypass lane curving into our field. This would take the straight edge of our field away for ease of cropping. We also will not allow utilities on our side of the road, which currently has none. We're not in the business of development and feel it's a developer's responsibility to extend utilities from currently developed land, not on what is cheaper to get them there. We feel this proposal as presented has an adverse impact on us. Our main concerns are runoff, utilities, and road requirements. We're not opposed to others' rights to development, but need to protect their business interests. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Robert. I think you've heard the answers to those questions. There'll be no more water coming off the property when he's done than there is today. In fact, it might be improved. At least that's the rules we have in place and what we anticipate happening. So,
Bridget, you feel the lots 1 and 2 make, because the storm retention ponds are down on lots 6 and 7.
So even with the ponds down in 6 and 7, they would need to take the majority, if not all of the drainage from 1 and 2. So all of the drainage needs to be directed towards those ponds or to not increase more than what it currently is. So when they look at the stormwater management, they break it apart into pieces of this part drains, say, to the north, this part to the east, and they can't exceed those values. So what's already draining to the east can't be exceeded. What's already draining to the south can't be exceeded. So it's not just you look at one big site, you do look at it in the smaller pieces.
Yeah, and that's not shown here, but North Shore Engineering has done a preliminary analysis of the site and off-site and those are the places, the correct places for the ponds to capture that water. And further drawings will be submitted to Bridget for review.
and she'll make sure they're right.
Yeah, well, that's part of the review process.
'Cause that's what she does.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Commissioner Baca?
Aye.
Commissioner Becky Schaefer?
Aye.
Commissioner Parrish?
Aye.
Commissioner Stoker?
Aye.
Commissioner Lemke?
Aye.
Commissioner Jim Schaefer?
Aye.
Alderman Stralcheck?
Aye.
Mayor Abendroth?
Aye.
8-0.
8-0, and that's adopted.
Okay, thank you.
No, we have one more item. Okay. The last item is policy item, ordinance amending Chapter 58 of the Mequon Municipal Code as it relates to filling, excavating, and berms, recommended by Planning Commission on May 14th, first reading at council on June 12th. Well, that hasn't even happened yet. Bridget, the floor is yours.
Just had to get my papers in order. So this is the same policy that was before the board, the commission last month. And the main item that was up for discussion was whether or not 1,000 cubic yards was the appropriate amount to bring to Plan Commission for review of grading, filling, and excavation plans. So the things that were evaluated between the last month's meeting and this month's meeting was whether or not other municipalities require Plan Commission approval at those levels and what the benefits of bringing a fill permit to Planning Commission at 1,000 cubic yards. The primary benefit of it coming to Planning Commission is the notification of the neighbors. So anytime a development comes to Planning Commission, they do get a notification postcard that there's a development happening. So in this revision, things like, and I'll use Highlander Estates as an example, when Highlander Estates came forward at Planning Commission, the filling and excavating was approved at that point. So they didn't need to come back and get another approval. So when a single family home comes forward and they have 1,000 cubic yards of fill, they don't have another mechanism to notify the neighbors that there's going to be a project nearby. This was the mechanism for them to be notified that there are going to be a few dump trucks on their road, and to be aware that their neighbor is doing a filling activity, and for them to provide that input. So that's the primary benefit of any fill permit greater than 1,000 cubic yards coming to Plan Commission.
And that affects coming and going.
Yes.
Okay.
So if they're hauling it in or exporting it off the site, anytime there's movement from the actual project development.
Okay. I lost my agenda. Do you want us to recommend anything here?
I think there was a lot of discussion last month, so I had anticipated that there would be some more questions and discussion this month as we move this forward.
Because we already recommended it. Correct?
You tabled it.
We tabled it?
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't even be talking about it.
Oh, gosh, you should
I'll
probably
move
move it from the
we
table.
move it from the table.
Second.
Motion and a second to remove from the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Now, does anybody have anything they want to say?
Well, my main issue last month was I was in favor of simplifying the process. The only instance where I wasn't was in a pre-approved subdivision where there was a grading plan already approved, and so other neighbors had already bought their lots assuming a specific grade, and then comes along a new neighbor wanting to change their grade. And so I was concerned that simplifying that process would take away that right.
If I might, how that works when we get lot grading plans that deviate from the master grading plan, the applicant does have to get a letter from all of the adjacent lots, as well as the homeowners association and the developer approving that additional elevation change for any deviation to the master grading plan. So they do have to go through that level of detail at the staff level. If they wanted to add additional fill, that would be lumped into that assessment.
That's great. Didn't come up last month. That's a good answer.
So to that point, I would still argue that if you have a subdivision of 25 lots that has an approved grading plan, master grading plan, homeowner on lot number 4 doesn't understand that homeowner on lot 5 needs 1,800 yards of fill. The developer very well may. The builder that's building the house on lot number 4 is going to understand that. It's a moot point. You're going to approve it if we match the master grading plan. So why, because one neighbor doesn't understand, do you make the builder come for this, go through this process? I don't see any need for this in a subdivision where there is an approved master grading plan. If there is a change to the master grading plan, then I completely agree. If someone wants to change it and build a berm, if someone wants to raise their elevation somehow and alter the grading plan and bring in 7,000 or 500 yards of fill for that matter, then I would be approving of it. I don't see any logic in the reason for anyone to need to, I don't care if I have to take out 9,000 yards of fill or bring in 1 million. What difference does it make if I ultimately am matching the master grading plan? I get that the neighbors should be notified, but you know what, when people are building a new subdivision, they understand there's gonna be dirt going in and going out and trucks coming and going. So the argument that it's to notify your neighbors that there's gonna be some dump trucks down the street, that's a ridiculous argument. Inherently in a new subdivision, you're going to have dump trucks, lots of them.
If I may again. So if there's an approved master grading plan and it's being matched, that does not need to come back to Planning Commission,
No matter how much fill.
no matter how much fill.
Well, amen. Then I'm all about it. Good job. Small victories.
So we don't have to do anything with this. This ordinance is going to...
So still single-family lots that do not have an approved master grading plan would still need to come back. But those are lots like Highgate, which we've seen several of recently. which does have a subdivision plat, but does not have a master grading plan. And we know that there's a significant amount of fill needed for each one of those lots. So it's the high gates of Mequon that would need to still come back for Planning Commission review.
And even to that extent, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, because I still struggle with that, because you're putting the cart in front of the horse here. You can't design a house on some of those lots. I know what has to happen in those lots. I have to tell my customer, you're going to need to bring in 8,000 yards of fill, and guess what? We're going to have to go in front of the planning commission, and they actually have the option to say no and not approve it. So now you've already put an offer in this lot, and I understand you can put a contingency on a lot offer to purchase, but sellers aren't willing to wait the three months it may take for the house to get designed, to get all the calculations done, and then how long it takes them to get in front of the planning commission. So it becomes an issue, and I've lived it firsthand here. I've told people on a lot in there, you know what, here's the reality, you're gonna need thousands of yards of fill. I can't in good faith tell you to purchase the lot, because I don't know what the planning commission's gonna say. So I still have an issue with that. I understand what you're trying to do, and trust me, I can't say this more emphatically, I am all about cities maintaining drainage in subdivisions, because there's a couple very disastrous situations in southeastern Wisconsin with massive lawsuits where the developer didn't maintain it, and there was flooding in basements. I'm not purporting that I don't want the city to have control, but 1,000 yards is a drop in the bucket in the case of Highgate. I mean, I don't know the exact numbers, but my guess is you're probably talking 7, 10, 15,000 yards are needed in some of those lots. So anyway, I'll stop. Just my opinion.
Mr. Schaefer.
I'm sorry to backtrack a little bit. I had to miss last month's meeting. So this was raised at, I did read the minutes. This was raised at last month's meeting coming out of engineering. The change specifically that is being proposed that we need to approve is what?
We are taking language from the ordinance and putting it into the standard specifications. It's the detailed language of what the contractors are required to do, but all of the enforcement language is remaining in the ordinance.
Okay. And it generated a lot of discussion last time, as for the minutes, and as I'm hearing here, we're not changing anything about, I'm not a developer or a builder, but I am a neighbor. And I may be the ignorant neighbor that you're talking about, but I certainly want to know if someone next to me is making a change so that I can try to educate myself about what it is. So we're not taking that away, except in the case of the example that was raised where it's a subdivision with a grading plan, and then you mentioned a couple of examples. Either if the master grading plan is being upheld, then no harm, no foul, that's just being executed, or in the case that Commissioner Parrish raised, if it's in a subdivision and someone wants to change something, then they have to already go ahead before they can even bring it forward. It doesn't come to us, but they have to have written approval of the HOA and the adjacent neighbors, yada, yada. Okay. But otherwise, there's still notification being given to the ignorant neighbors. Exhibit A.
So even for the master grading plan, so if a new subdivision were to come forward and present a master grading plan, Planning Commission would be able to weigh in on that, and the neighbors would get a notification card for that. So even with the subdivisions and the commercial developments, Planning Commission is still getting the opportunity to provide comment on that. There's just not a separate line item that says specifically for fill purposes.
Okay.
Can I ask the question? I assume it's Mequon's policy, we're not developing any subdivisions, including the one we just looked at, without a master grading plan anymore?
Correct.
So this will become a moot point at some point down
Correct.
the road. It's just the few remaining lots that exist, Highgate being one of them. I can't even think of any others.
Well, you could buy an individual lot from somebody and,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
and put a bucket load of fill on it.
Yeah. And again, I'm gonna support this change ultimately, even though I still think, I think 1,000 yards is a ridiculously small amount of yardage to be requiring us to come. And it really is bigger picture for me is the fees that we're paying for it, and the fact that it wasn't enforced for the last 15 years, and now suddenly we're getting fees. And so it's amazing how many times I bring in 997 yards of fill to my lots, I can tell you that.
You could have 999.
To the best of my knowledge, Mequon hasn't been out there seeing if I maybe went over like by half a yard, but okay.
They will now.
Let the minutes show. Yard's ridiculous.
There are closeout procedures where we are going out after the fill is placed to make sure that things aren't erroneous. That what is being said is being done is actually what's being done. So most of the closeout procedures are visual. When you do get to the higher amounts, it does require some spot survey that shows that you're not impeding the drainage, that you did generally follow that plan. For most developments, they're already doing similar things, especially on the commercial side when we require them to do grading as-built. So it's not a new requirement per se, because they're already doing something along those lines. It's just allowing us to have the enforcement and the ability to close these fill permits. So as they're approved, that we also can close them.
So you don't need action from us, because we already approved this.
You tabled it. So you do need action.
Make a
It
motion.
says recommended by Planning Commission on May 14th. That's today.
Did I
Little
make
presumptive.
We're
it?
living in the,
You like what you wrote?
we're living in the future here.
You crafted it so well you approved it.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Move approval.
Second.
All right. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, next meeting is Monday, June 11th, 6 PM.
Move to adjourn.
Second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.